punchline. He knocked the fuck out of Alistair Overeem. It almost seems like it should be impossible. Welcome.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, and this is going to be controversial, I know, but why I think MMA is the hardest sport on planet Earth. And before you guys start freaking out and go, no, dude, fuck that. Football is the hardest. Or basketball is the hardest. Or tennis is the hardest. Hear me out. And understand going into this that I understand that I have a very clear bias, right? Like, if I had to pick one sport that I had to watch every single day for the rest of my life from the sun up to sundown, I would pick fighting. I think it's by far the most exciting, and I don't even think anything comes close. And so I understand, like, going into this that I prefer to watch fighting, so obviously I'm going to, like, have an argument against why I think it's the hardest. But hear me out. So, first off, if we're talking about a team sport like football or basketball, count them out. They're already discounted for me. And that might be unfair, but you've got to realize that when you're fighting, like, you can rely a little bit on your coaches and stuff to give you advice, like your corner, but at the end of the day, it's all on you and what you're doing and how you're executing your game plan and how well you're doing it and what you're doing to deal with what this guy's doing, right? If you have a team sport, some of that, like, mental stress that comes with that, I think it's alleviated a little bit because you have teammates. Like, if you're a corner, like, yeah, sure, you know, like, okay, I have to cover this guy, but you also might know in the back of your head that on that particular play, like, oh, I've got help over top if he smokes me, though. You know what I mean? Like, there's a reliance on other people that I think can be frustrating at times, no doubt, but I think it does more to, like, alleviate the mental stress than it does to promote it. So that's the first reason, right? And the second reason is because a lot of this is going to be mental, I think, but when you're talking about fighting, you're talking about guys who might fight if they're active 4 times a year. And most of the experience that they're getting, they're not gaining it through a real-time environment like you are in other sports. Like in basketball, you play 80 games a year, right? Like baseball, 150 some. Like, a lot of your experience that you're gaining is through doing it in a real situation with real fans around you. Like, it's a real game. It counts for something. And a lot of what these fighters are doing, they're doing it in the gym, and there's no real measurement for how well you're doing until you fight. And when you do fight, it can do so much to help your career or so much to hurt it all in one night. Like, think about guys who could have had maybe their careers turned around, who have just been like, they got knocked out or flattened, you know what I mean? Maybe it changed the course of their career, hurt their mentality. Like, it's so much to deal with. Like, the weight of that moment when you step into the octagon is massive. I think it's unparalleled. I don't think there's a lot of sports that are like that. Maybe like boxing and stuff, you know, but even then, like, here's another thing too. Like, when you're talking about boxing and even other combat sports like kickboxing, it's not uncommon to see guys with like 1 loss on their record or undefeated. That's extremely rare in MMA. Like, look at Floyd Mayweather's 50-0 in his boxing career, right? One of those was a gimme. He fought Conor. Like, let's face reality, it was a gimme, right? But he's still 50-0. Habib, who is fighting this weekend, is 25-0, and people are freaking out about it. It is such a hard feat to accomplish because you have to worry about so many factors. Like, you have to worry about... And, okay, so let's knock... I love jiu-jitsu. I love wrestling. I love, like, anytime you... I've said this before. I think that anytime you isolate an art, you can specialize it and you can make it, like, beautiful, right? Like, you can perfect things about it. But I'm going to... Like, I think wrestling and jiu-jitsu are very consequential. Like, they have dire consequences, right? Like, they can be extreme, right? Like, life or death in a real-life situation if it was simulated. But you're not getting hit in the face. You're not getting elbowed. You know, you're not getting knees getting thrown at you. You're not getting smacked in the face with someone's fucking foot. So for those reasons, I'm going to discount it, just because you don't have to worry about those things. You don't have to worry about actually getting hit in the face. Like, it takes a special type of person to want to get punched all the time. So, all right. Now, let's talk about the consequences of other sports, right? So, name any sport that you can think of. Name a sport where you don't get some type of do-over. I can't think of any, right? Like, in football, the other team scores a touchdown, they're going to kick it off to you, and you're going to get the ball back, you get another chance. Basketball, someone scores a point, big deal. You just get the ball back and go get to score again, try to score more than them, right? Like, it's a back and forth thing. Not that fighting can't be back and forth, But even in boxing and stuff, like if you get clipped with something, and this is what I meant about like wrestling and especially jiu-jitsu, like if you make the wrong move, you can absolutely be caught in a choke. I just think that fighting's a little bit harder because, like I said, you got to start on your feet, and you might be dealing with a high-level striker, right? But like jiu-jitsu is very, very consequential. But I'll think about sports like football, non-combat sports, or even boxing. You get a 10 count if you get knocked down, right, or an 8 count or some shit. I don't know all the ins and outs of boxing, but you get a chance to prove, like, that's not the case in MMA. Your chance to prove that you are able to stay with it, unlike in boxing, is like an active defense while you rock. Like, if you get dropped, they're like, all right, let's make sure you can get his wits about him. That's not the case in MMA. Like, you have to get your wits about you while defending yourself. It's fucking hard, man. Imagine how you feel when you're exhausted. Like, you just did a really tough workout, and you're sitting there, and you're sweating, and you're laying on the floor. Imagine feeling that late in a round, and then someone clips you with the right hand, and all of a sudden, you're like, your world is rocked. And you're trying to deal with that, and you're trying to come back, and you're trying to stand back up and just figure out what's going on. Like, while you're on autopilot, right? You hear fighters say that all the time. Like, I don't even remember what happened. Look at Frankie Edgar when he fought Ray Maynard and got clipped in the first. I mean, there's a very good argument it probably would have been stopped nowadays, I think. Maybe. Depending on your ref and how much you knew about Frankie's tolerance, like his ability to take a beating. And then he tells you after the fight, he comes back and ends up fighting to a draw. One of the more dominant rounds you're going to see in a UFC title fight, right? And he comes back and he's like, yeah, man, I was just on autopilot. I was just going. Like, imagine having to do that. Like, there aren't sports that make you do that, there aren't many sports I can think of that make you operate while your brain is scrambled. You know what I mean? And scrambled from being punched in the mouth. All right, so, like, my point is, when you do something that costs you in fighting, you have to deal with the consequences all at once. It's not like someone rocks you and you fall to the ground and you're like, all right, he got me, but now I get to stand back up and I get to go do it to him. No, as soon as you get dropped, you have a guy swarming you and trying to beat your face in or grab your neck and strangle you. Like, that's a lot, man. That's a lot to deal with. I just don't think, and this is probably the biggest reason why I think it's the hardest. I just think there's no other sports with consequences that are so dire. And there's so many things, and also this part of it is because MMA is young and it's constantly evolving, right? So we still don't know everything about it. Like, it's still growing. If you went back and watched fighters from like the 90s and you saw what the talent looked like today and compared them, it would be like you would think you made a way bigger jump than just 10 or 20 years, right? Like, we're at that point, we're still in that point where like guys from 10 years ago probably get smashed by guys of today who aren't as dominant as those guys 10 years ago were, if that makes sense. You know, it's like, it's still growing and it's still evolving, so it's hard to adapt to and it's hard to keep up with because people are figuring things out. And here's the other thing. Like I said earlier, like, you're isolating things in boxing and wrestling, and you're not doing that in MMA. You have to worry about all of them. And you might have a specialty, something you're really good at, but you still have to be able to defend the other thing, right? Like, Habib, for example, he's a perfect example because he's so good at wrestling, and he's a specialist there, obviously, but he also has to find a way to get past your striking, like he's going to have to do this weekend against Max, and get you to the ground. And if you're able to implement that game plan and control where it takes place, great. But if not, you're going to be in for a long fucking night. It's hard. It's hard to get so good at all that stuff. And you can't be lacking in any one area. You know what I mean? So I just think there's more to prepare for than a lot of sports. Like, and sports that have been around for a while, we've got these programs developed and these like systems in place that help guys get up to speed. Like, they know what works. We're going to do this day in, day out because we've been doing it for 100 years. You know what I mean? Like, we've got the shit figured out. Like, I'm not saying other sports don't grow, but I feel like they're kind of growing like this, like slowly over time, and fighting's going, you know what I mean? Like, that learning curve just keeps getting steeper and steeper. At least for a while, until I think it'll start to level out at some point. But MMA is also cyclical, right? Like, in a sense, as in like a wrestling style will take over. Like, it seems to be kind of the case right now. Like with guys like DC, and like people are having a hard time dealing with that style when they get on top of you. So until they deal with that, that's going to be the problem you have to overcome. Then when you overcome that, like, it might be like at first in MMA when Gracie came in, It was a jiu-jitsu problem, right? Like, and then once you overcome that, you start realizing, like, oh, okay, this style works. Now this style works. And it goes in circles until you feel... And it takes special type of people like Khabib, guys like, Gracie, Liddell. They introduce that wave, and they perform it at the highest level that we've ever seen performed. And then people come in, find a way to deal with it, and the sport, like, kind of grows from there. It's interesting in that regard, right? Like, there are only so many disciplines that you really focus on, but they all just keep getting shuffled through the deck. So I just think it's part of the reason that makes the MMA so hard is because it's new and we're still figuring things out about it. Like these other sports and stuff, we've known what to do and how to train for a long time, but it's not the case with MMA. Also, I want to clarify that I'm not saying that MMA has the best athletes. I just think that when you're talking about a sport where your entire career can be flipped around by one punch and having your head in the wrong place one time, that's crazy. I just think it's not as consequential. I think that if you took sports or athletes from other sports like football, and we're starting to see it a little bit now because there's a little more money in MMA, right? But I think that those athletes could have massive potential if they went over to MMA. They're gifted. Look at some of these guys in the NFL. They're like 220 pounds and like running 4 340s and shit like that and jumping God knows how many inches, right? Like, obviously they're a freak athlete, and I think those skills will transition to MMA. But I'm not saying that people in MMA are more athletic, right? I just think that like the things that they have to worry about on a day in, day out basis and the magnitude of their fights when they do happen is just more significant. That's all I'm saying. Like, I don't, and again, the consequences thing. I just don't think there are sports with consequences as dire as there are fighting. Or like, there's always some kind of agreed upon reset, right? Like, oh, okay, you scored a point. Well, now I get my chance to score my point. Like, fighting's not about being fair. Like, yeah, you get your chance to go in there and exchange with the guy, but if he tags you, he's not going to let you hit him back and see if he can hit you harder. Like, he's going to pour it on you. There's just not a lot of sports like it, and it's one of the reasons it's my favorite. I'm obviously, like I said, I obviously have a very clear bias, but let me know what you guys think.